But feel free to kind of
But we're
just
not
spread
using a
out and
big
ask any
telescope like
questions that
that.
you
This
like.
is a
Just try to
small
enjoy as much as we
refracting
can
telescope with a
with
DSLR
the view
camera.
through the Vixen
The moon on
telescope
the
right now.
sky is about half a
It looks
degree
like
across.
the Vixen is
So much
soon-ish
larger
gonna
than the
lose it
angles
to the
we're
trees
talking
as well.
about.
There's we think about a degree until it kind of gets into the trees itself. But we'll hold out as long as we
someone
can.
says it was never total. In fact, it is a total eclipse, but just barely.
Well, I guess while we're getting this cool
and that light
view,
that we see on it is just the light that's refracted through Earth's atmosphere, which is why it's reddish looking.
It's a nice little camera software.
If you go to
timeanddate.com,
it shows like the just rays fully inside of Earth's shadow. So that side that's illuminated is the part that's right close to the edge of
plug in
Earth's
the
shadow.
extension cord and everything. Nowadays,
but our eyes are really good at adjusting to different levels of light.
With these really nice plane wave
And so,
telescopes that
even
can
though
hook
that
up
part of the moon
to
is
the
quite a bit darkened,
software. So
still looks
it's
bright to our
much
eyes.
better, beautiful views, and we can manipulate the images. So like we've been seeing, we can manipulate the gain on the telescope, which is kind of like the sensitivity of the telescope. We can change the exposure times, so we can do milliseconds up to
streaming this
minutes.
from
we've taken
Honolulu, Hawaii, near the University of Hawaii at
They
Manoa.
all look pretty fantastic.
My name is Roy Gal. I'm an astronomer at the Institute for Astronomy.
Right now, apparently,
and all public outreach events. My colleagues Zach and Carolyn are
both of the
staffing the keyboards, answering questions on the YouTube chat, and the most important person here is Alex Dierba, who you don't hear, but it's his telescope and camera actually providing feeds. So a huge mahalo to Alex for
so we got a question
doing this for us.
Opinion, what was some of the most
He's not a
amazing
professional
things
astronomer.
you
He does this
observed
for
at
fun.
Lowell Observatory? So it looks like, is that
So he's the
Jose on the
coolest person in the room.
Joe said the conjunction for sure. So Joe thinks that the conjunction.
And we're glad you can all join us and enjoy this view from around the world.
Observatory.
You can
what would you say
check us out on our Facebook page and our Twitter feed. They're all
I really
UHIFA,
liked when
University
I
of
could
Hawaii
see the
Institute for
Mercury
Astronomy, and we
transit that
post
happened
news
a couple years
stories,
ago.
astronomical
That was really
events,
cool
public
because
talks.
we had basically
We're
just
going to be
opened
having a public
the
talk by
Godot
our
deck,
intern
and so we had a bunch of
director,
fancy new
Karen Meach,
telescopes to
coming
like
up in June,
see this
talking
new
about
transit happening, and so we used it in a couple
the
of those, which was really
object that
exciting. We had to
passed
get
through
up
our
like
solar
super early in the
system
morning,
not
which
that
is
long
kind of
ago,
like
but
weird
that came
for
from
us
another solar
night
system.
owls who stay up all night gazing at the stars,
That
but it was
specific
totally worth
astronomer,
it.
who I shall
So
not name,
I would say that's one of my
claims it's an
favorite
alien
ones.
spacecraft,
Or
but it is
looking at
not. We have
Pluto
conclusive
through
evidence.
our
He's just ignoring
old
it.
historic Clark telescope, which is its birthday is coming up pretty soon, so keep an eye out for that. But
so we have
cool
already
too.
passed
So
maximum eclipse, and we are on our way out of
so
totality.
Visually,
So
but it's
totality
more like a
ended at
nostalgic thing.
126.
So our historic Clark telescope, you have to go through like 7
So the moon
different,
appears red
training
because the
sessions,
light that's
and then you
hitting
have
the
to, like, take
moon,
a written and,
even though the moon is in
like,
Earth's shadow,
whoa, there's Jupiter.
the sunlight, some of the sunlight is
Nice.
passing through Earth's atmosphere and being refracted or bent by the atmosphere
But yeah,
and still landing
had
on
to
the
go
moon.
through,
Just like at
the
sunset,
different-
right? The sun goes down
that's
below
really
the
great.
horizon.
The
And
different
even though you
trainings
can't
and
see the sun,
tests we had to
the
take,
horizon
and,
looks
during
red.
my
And that's
test,
because the atmosphere
we,
bends the
had
red
to,
light
like,
from the
fight through
sun
the clouds
and it
for the
ends up in your
first
eyeballs,
30
whereas the
minutes or
blue
so.
light from the sun gets
And by
scattered
the
all
time
over
it
the
ended,
place.
we got to
So
see
the blue light
Neptune,
from the sun
and
that's
Neptune's my
passing through
favorite
Earth's
planet,
atmosphere
even though
gets
it was,
scattered
like,
in every
a little
direction, but
blue
the red
dot. It was
light,
a little
some of
blue
it is
dot
being
that I
bent and
found
landing
through
on the
a
moon,
125-year-old
the
telescope.
moon
So I
is
think
in
that
Earth's
was just like
shadow.
the coolest
And
thing
that's
I've
what
ever
casts
done.
that coppery
So,
reddish color.
yeah, but
And so if
like
Earth
you saw
was
there on Mellencamp,
heavily
there was
covered in
Jupiter, and now we're
clouds
gonna
right
move
now,
over to
then we would
Saturn.
not get such a red
Oh, look at that
moon
little guy.
because the clouds would prevent
I
that
missed these
red light
too.
from
They went
making
away
it
for a
through.
while and they're back
But we
now, and I'm
must
very
have
happy
relatively
about
clear
it.
skies across a significant part of Earth, so
One
that
time
we're
I looked
actually
at
getting a
Saturn
really,
through one of our
really nice
telescopes
deep
with
red
a
moon for
nebula
this
filter,
eclipse.
and nebula filters, they kind of like manipulate the color of an image to kind of bring it out brighter. And I looked at Saturn
It's our
with it
pleasure
on,
to
and it
provide
was
this. It's
bright
great
blue.
to
It was like
bring a little bit of
teal, and I
astronomy
don't know
to
why I
people in
found
the
that
world.
so funny, but I was like
We know
literally
everyone likes
crying
looking up
because
and
I was
wondering
laughing
what's out
so
there.
hard about this little blue Saturn.
And we're always learning new
But
things
yeah,
every day.
there's our
We
little guy
write
Saturn.
textbooks, but those textbooks get
It's also really
updated
cool.
every year, and that's because
Galileo,
we're always
he
learning new
looked at
things.
Saturn and he said that it had ears because its rings kind of
If
looked
you
like
keep
ears
your eyes
to
on
him.
the
So
No, on the news, there'll be an interesting news story really cool. about planets around other stars coming out tomorrow from us, Caltech, and the University of California, but I can't tell you what the
I'm glad we could catch some of the planets on our way out, basically.
So just a tease.
So they are, of course, rising in the morning. So
9 a.m. Pacific time.
Morning bird, then that is nice for you guys. So hopefully we'll be able to continue to see some of these planets as time goes on, because they're definitely stellar to look at in the night sky. For sure.
Stellar. No, they're planetary.
True. It just doesn't sound as cool.
Our pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, sorry guys, they pay us to be smart, not to be funny. So
we're glad the weather is cooperating, the telescope is cooperating.
So let us know if you have any last minute questions. I think we basically ran into a tree for the Vixen as far as I heard last. So I'm not sure how much more we can get through that guy. So let's see. And clouds, of course. It looks like we have another comment.
We're just playing around with the exposure
of all the streams that are
settings
covering
as
the
the
lunar
brightness
eclipse,
of the
this one
moon is
has been the
changing
best
with
and the
more
one
of
I've
the
stayed
sunlight coming
the
on it.
longest in watch for hours. That's so cool. Thanks for joining us. We love to hear your feedback. That's awesome. And thanks so much. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed it, and I know Haley did too. So
when this
that's awesome.
eclipse ends, the
I always
eclipse is 100% done in about 2.5 hours.
Yeah, this view of Jupiter is actually really cool. We can see one of its bands on there. I like to call those Jupiter's tan
totality
lines.
has ended. The partial eclipse ends at 2:52 in the morning, our time, which is an hour and 20 minutes from now,
Jupiter
roughly.
just like missed some parts of
and
it
after
with
that,
the
moon is only
Earth's
penumbra, which is the outer part of Earth's shadow.
Yours is much more scientific than mine and well thought through, but I call them the bacon strips of Jupiter. So
we're not going to stay up that long. We're probably going to call it quits here in about 20 minutes.
Probably not as scientifically formed as yours.
Go to work in the morning.
I mean,
before I have to take my kids to school.
Yeah, those are really cool. Those are little storms going across Jupiter.
Always fun to see.
Yeah.
And so if we actually like kind of overexpose the planet itself, we can start to get to see some of the moons of Jupiter.
So we've passed totality, so we saw as much coverage in red as we're going to see at around 118, and we are viewing
circling
it
around
here
them.
in
So
Honolulu,
the 4 Galilean
Hawaii.
moons were the moons discovered by Galileo with his telescope, so that's how they get their name, basically. There's some pretty cool moons in there. So one of them is Europa, which is kind of hot science right now because we think that there's some cool underground oceans there, and we're planning to send some specific spacecrafts to delve into more dynamics of the moon, which is really cool. So exciting things with Jupiter coming up hopefully pretty soon.
My favorite moon is Io. It's actually my favorite moon in the solar system.
Someone asked about two moons
the smallest
with
of
different
Jupiter's
orbits.
4 Galilean moons, and
That's
it's
really
the closest, and it's
depends
just like
on
this
the
little angry dude because Jupiter's pulling on it so hard
as
that
long as those
it's
orbits
in
cross
like basically
the
its insides are
at regular
lights
intervals,
just changed in here. Basically, the insides are like coming out the sides in these giant volcanoes. It's like the most volcanically active body.
Probably be pretty rare to get both moons lined up. They would be eclipsing each other.
Probably not the universe.
If you want to really puzzle yourself about geometry, then you could think about solar systems that have two suns, like Tatooine does in Star Wars. We have found systems like that where there's planets orbiting
so it looks like we did
stars.
just lose
And there
the
you
moon
can have
in
stars
the Vixen.
eclipsing each
So
other.
I guess we'll
you could have,
try and at least give you guys one last pretty look that we took a little bit just before the total
planets
eclipse
go around
happened.
The two stars, so the two stars are in the middle, and the planets are
see at least that nice pink or red color
around the two stars.
It's quite close to the total eclipse, so it looks pretty much the same, I would say, but not a bad view for a night that was where we were fighting clouds. I would say this is a win over anything. So
yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, even just getting this view right here.
Someone asked about shadow and calculating Earth's diameter. The way the ancient Greeks
even though we
actually
didn't get to see most of the total
Earth's
eclipse,
diameter
I think it was still
by
pretty
using
worth it, right?
sticks and shadows on the Earth. And
then hopefully in the end too, you guys learned a little bit about what a lunar eclipse is and a little bit more about the moon and the history of the Apollo missions, and also something to look forward to with the Artemis missions to come. So
many thousands of years ago, the ancient Greeks already had simple evidence for the Earth being a sphere.
Seems oddly specific.
Here's the name of that Greek astronomer.
Hey, I mean, you never know. Maybe they're going to like an astronomy trivia night somewhere.
That would be kind of cool.
That would be really cool.
So yeah, I think we did definitely lose the moon in the Vixen. So yeah, this is just a nice last look at what we were able to do tonight. And we want to thank you guys all for sticking with us in the early morning
to try
and view a total lunar eclipse. And I hope that in your location, wherever you were in the world, you had a little more luck than we did.
They estimated
but for those of you guys who stayed on,
pretty
thank you so
accurately,
much.
given that they were using their sticks and shadows and had to measure distances from one place to the other using their feet, basically.
Yeah. So yeah, and thank you guys for coming out here.
Understanding
and
again,
thanks to the whole team that put this together. I mean, we've got
allowed
people
them to calculate
operating
the
the
size of the Earth
people
and understand that it was a sphere many thousands of years ago.
It really does take a
today
village,
about
you
the
know.
Earth not
so
being a sphere
I really appreciate everyone, and
pretty
I hope you guys
strange
join us
given
again
that there are
soon
many
for
simple
other live
experiments that
streams that
show
we're going to be doing. We've also
we live on a
got a
ball.
lot of interactive stargazing and different things that are already on our YouTube channel. So if you haven't checked those out, I highly recommend you do. They're totally worth it. So yeah, I think that is pretty much all we've got for you guys tonight. So
and you certainly do not need a telescope to enjoy much of the astronomical sights that are out there. With a relatively simple pair of binoculars, like a 10 by 50 binoculars, you can see lots of detail on the moon. If you have a steady hand or a tripod that you can mount your binoculars to, you can see some of the moons of Jupiter and Saturn's rings. And today you can get motorized, go-to computer-controlled telescopes for a few $100s. You don't need a big one, especially in a light-polluted place like Honolulu, to be able to enjoy some of the sites like some of the globular clusters and open clusters that you can see. Planets, you can see the phases of Venus. Enjoy Mars. So now you can see it's brightening up as we are emerging from totality. Still get that really nice red color. The moon will not look similar tomorrow. There will be no eclipse tomorrow. You need a really good alignment of the Earth, the sun, and the moon in a straight line. And because moon's orbit is tilted relative to Earth's orbit around the sun, from one day to the next, the moon is not lined up correctly to get an eclipse. The next almost total eclipse is in November of this year. Yeah, we're going to end this stream around 2 o'clock in the morning, our time. You're very welcome for the stream. A good night or a good morning, good evening to wherever you are on Earth. I see someone saying that their students sign on in 20 minutes. Maybe we can hang out for a couple more minutes so they can see something. The video, I believe, is recorded on YouTube and will remain up there. So I know the video of the conjunction that we did back in 2020 is available there. You can find us where you're viewing us here at UHIFA on YouTube. That's what we are on Facebook and Twitter as well. and you can just Google University of Hawaii Institute for Astronomy and find us, our website. Our website is, I will put it in here, is ifa.hawaii.edu. And we are at IFA on social media. So some people ask, what's the longest lunar eclipse? So the Earth's shadow is much larger than the diameter of the moon. And this evening or this morning, we're just skirting the edge of Earth's shadow. So we only had about 14 minutes of totality. But if you go right through the middle of Earth's shadow, you can have over an hour and a half of totality. The longest lunar eclipse that's coming up in any reasonable time is going to be in the year 2264, when none of us will be around to witness it. And that one will be almost 2 hours. That's going to be a dark eclipse, I imagine, if humans are still around to see it. We're doing this from Honolulu, Hawaii. So the next solar eclipse is in June 10th. It's an annular eclipse, which means that you have a ring of light around the moon during the eclipse, so that the moon is a little bit farther from Earth, and therefore it looks smaller on the sky, and so it doesn't block 100% of the sun. We will have a total solar eclipse in 2024 that we'll be able to see in most of the United States. If you've ever seen a solar eclipse, you know it's a pretty amazing event. I went to Oregon to see the one a couple years ago. That was pretty incredible. That was my first eclipse. We have astronomers who actually study the sun during eclipses because you can see the outer parts of the sun. One of our colleagues, Shadia Habal, travels around the world catching eclipses, and really amazing images they have with special telescopes and filters showing the material streaming off of the sun. It's many times the radius of the sun. Pretty incredible. And you can only study those portions of the sun during eclipses, otherwise the sun is too bright, and spacecraft that observe the sun can't see as close to the sun as you can with during an eclipse. So their views are pretty spectacular. Her team is called the Solar Wind Sherpas, and I'll just put their website up here because they have amazing images of the sun. Someone asked where the 2024 solar eclipse would be visible. There are maps of the path of totality on timeanddate.com. So it starts, it crosses over Mexico and then sort of over the eastern central United States and up towards sort of the area of Maine and the Canadian border. Some places that I'll see it: Cleveland, Rochester, Montreal, Indianapolis, Toledo, Little Rock, Dallas. So lots of significant cities will see at least part of the totality.
To my father's property.
Oh.
Really close to.
So someone's asking if most tracking telescopes track this well. If you buy a decent go-to telescope and you align it correctly, so before we started this broadcast, Alex spent some time aligning his telescope so that it was leveled and knew where north was and things like that, then it'll track well. If you don't align it correctly, then you're not going to get good tracking. If you're looking up at the sky, the moon was near the constellation Scorpius. So if you see some bright stars near the moon, then you're seeing the constellation Scorpius. So we'll hang out here for another 10 or 15 minutes and then we're gonna pack it up. We hope you'll check out our website, ifa.hawaii.edu, for news stories. We are a large academic astronomy unit at the University of Hawaii. We have 45 or so PhD astronomers, 30 to 40 graduate students. We run observatories on Mauna Kea and Haleakala and participate in space missions. We have an undergraduate and a graduate program, so if you're thinking about a career in astronomy or just want to take some astronomy classes, you can come here to the University of Hawaii at Manoa and take classes from some of us. Someone is asking about Jupiter and Saturn. So Saturn is rising first, so Saturn will be a little bit higher in the sky than Jupiter, and Jupiter is the brighter one, which is rising a little bit later. And they're rising almost to due east. They should not be very high in the sky yet. And the bright oranger star high up in the sky is Arcturus or Hokulea. Someone's asking that they went at 4:11 Pacific Standard Time. I don't know where you are, Jenny Chen, so it depends where you are on Earth, but California did not have a view of totality because California is not facing the right way to see the total eclipse. Everyone's welcome for the stream and the commentary. I'm glad you're enjoying it, and I'm glad we can answer some of your questions. Yeah, someone's asking about the stars that are close to the moon. Scorpio looks kind of like a backwards curved check mark to me. That's probably a bad description, but it's the best I can do off the top of my head. And the moon is kind of cradled by the check mark of Scorpio. We don't have a big enough field of view here to show you all the stars with this setup. So here in Hawaii, Jupiter and Saturn are rising now. Depending on what's on your horizon, if there's mountains or something in the way, you won't see them. You have to look towards the eastern horizon. I can't see them. My horizon is blocked by my eastern horizon is blocked by mountains. But there are a lot of apps you can get on your phone or on your computer that will show you what's visible right now. A lot of great phone apps. You just, if you have a smartphone, an Android or an iOS phone, you can just point to somewhere in the sky and it'll show you what's up. Google has a great program, Google Sky. If you want to understand the geometry of lunar and solar eclipses, you can just Google lunar eclipse geometry and you'll find lots of videos that show you what's happening and why you don't get them all the time. If the orbit of the moon was exactly in the same plane as the orbit of the Earth is around the sun, then we would get an eclipse every month. We would get a solar eclipse when the moon was between the sun and the Earth. That's when we have new moon. The moon is backlit by the sun, so we see the dark part of the moon. The moon's not lit for us. That's new moon. And if it was lined up with the sun every time, we would get a solar eclipse every month at new moon, and we would get a lunar eclipse every month at full moon. But because the orbit of the moon is tilted relative to Earth's orbit, sometimes the moon is a little bit above the sun or a little bit below the sun compared to Earth, and so we don't get an eclipse. The place where the moon's orbit intersects the Earth's orbit is called a node. And in order to get an eclipse, that node has to occur when the moon, the earth, and the sun are in a straight line relative to each other, not when the moon is someplace else in its orbit around the earth. Shout out to my friends Chris and Ryan, who I see are hanging on here in the early morning hours. I'm glad some of you around the world are getting a clear view like we are, and I'm glad those of you who got cloudy skies or don't get the full lunar eclipse where you are were able to join us. Someone asking what the supermoon is. So the orbit of the moon around the Earth is not a perfect circle. It's an ellipse. It's a little bit elongated. So sometimes the moon gets closer and farther from the Earth in its orbit. When the moon is closest to us, it's called perigee. That means closest point to Earth. When it's farthest, it's called apogee. So when the moon is closer to Earth, it looks a little bit bigger, and we call that a supermoon. So actually, perigee was about a day ago, and so the moon is really close to Earth, comparatively speaking. It's only a few percent difference, 7% closer, plus 7% farther away, or minus 7% closer. So it's not a huge difference in distance, but it is noticeable. And so the moon does look bigger at perigee than it does at apogee by quite a bit. Yeah, we're now well past totality. Totality ended a little more than half an hour ago. And now you can see that the copper color is not so visible anymore. And we're probably going to end this feed in a few minutes. It'll be available on our YouTube channel here to rewatch. We have videos from some of our students talking about their research, and some talks about astronomy. We'll be populating it with more videos over the next few months from our past public presentations. And again, you can keep up with events going on here, astronomy news, public events that we'll start having again as COVID decreases at our website, ifa.hawaii.edu, and our Twitter and Facebook, UHIFA. So I think we're going to get ready to go to sleep. I'll get my 4 hours of sleep before it's time to wake up the kids and take them to school. I don't know what time Alex has to go to work. Alex is lucky. He tells me he got the day off, so he can stay up, but I'm not. So again, thank you all for joining us. We're the University of Hawaii Institute for Astronomy. My name is Roy Gal. My colleagues Carolyn and Zach helping out on answering questions, and Alex Dierba providing the feed from here in Honolulu, Hawaii, where we're lucky to have clear skies and a great view of this total lunar eclipse, the super flower blood moon eclipse. Flower moon, because it's May when flowers bloom. That's just a colloquial name for the full moon in May. Super, because the moon was closer to Earth, was close to perigee, so it looks bigger. And a blood moon, because it looks red during totality. That's a relatively new term. Everyone uses it now. It's pretty amazing how quickly things come into our language. All right, I'm gonna turn off our live stream here, and that'll be the end of our broadcast from Hawaii. Thank you again for joining us.